what I'm saying. That's what I was gonna say. Like, I mean, what was the last film? It couldn't have been last year.
It was like almost 2 years now.
2 years ago, man. Terrible. Disappointing our film heads.
But is it also possible that there are no, well, maybe we're not even keeping tabs, or there are no real films that,
No, I wouldn't say that. I think it's just that, we got really absorbed in cultural politics and political culture. So,
okay, fair enough.
Yeah, like, I mean, I say cultural politics. I mean, I guess I'm talking there about more Afrobeats, and less Afro-Nolly.
No, not just Afrobeat. Even, I mean, the most popular beat, isn't it? What do you guys call that? Oble.
Yes, exactly.
Oble.
But I mean, I think that not that politics has stopped being relevant, interesting, or annoyingly ever present, but just that we should nonetheless still engage in the cultural debate, because sometimes politics is downstream from culture, as some people say. So, in pursuit of that ambition, we watched The Mark of the Hawk, which is a 1957 film, believe it or not, shot in Enugu, and involving or starring Sydney Poitier and Eartha Kitt, no less. And then some other people I didn't know before, like Wano Hernandez and John McIntyre, shy white people from the 50s that I didn't know. But most people will know Sydney Poitier and Eartha Kitt, right? I mean, you guys knew those two, no?
Only that one, yeah.
Sydney Poitier,
yeah. Okay.
I don't know the Kitt, so not even.
Yeah, she was even a singer, actually, at the Kitt.
No.
An actress.
Not surprising.
Yeah. I mean, it's not spoiling the film to say that she was tasked with speaking Igbo in various parts of the film. And I mean, that's part of what we'll be discussing today, how well she did in speaking Igbo, but also wider elements of the film and why it's relevant besides the fact that it was shot in Enugu and kind of was centered on British colonial Africa, and this interesting window into like what Hollywood thought of colonial Africa from a certain point of view. But before we do like kind of recap, maybe we could just do immediate reactions first. How did you absorb the film? How did it strike you? Just as a piece of production, and then the storytelling, and then the actual story itself. OG, you want to take a step?
It just seemed to be more, more like it has its own political, like really strong political edge.
Sure.
But the thing that kind of shone, or what's the process of shine or whatever, passed was like it came across as a culture, as a gospel, as more of a gospel thing.
Yeah.
Which, of course, religion is tied to, of course, goes out to like politics and all, but I was expecting it to take a different turn.
Yeah.
That the final outcome, So, but it still has some political like edges, like organization, getting the people mobilized, and then violence as a form of action. So it's for someone that's keen on political matters and also observes things from a range of perspectives. You're able to pump things out.
Right.
That's I'll leave it at that for now.
Okay. I mean, Emeka, your own reactions in terms of the feeling.
I think my reaction is twofold. One might be some kind of response to OED's observation, and that it would be to say that that the film does raise, it has a conflict, one way, and the way that I think about it is that the conflict it centers really is one that doesn't, I don't know if it gets talked about that much, but it certainly does gets its fair share of conversation, or sparks its fair share of conversation within left circles. which is the jostle for it's a jostle. I think it's a jostle, but to put it simply, it's the different approaches, that different, parts of the Nigerian, the emerging Nigerian society at the time took towards nation building. So where Oyeji talks about the church, I think that's just one aspect of society at the time, albeit more foreign, which reflects, the white man's own position on how the Nigerian nation should have been built. But there was also the labor unions, and then there was, I don't know if it was, I don't think that they were the Zikists as such.
Well, yeah. I mean, who else could they have been? But anyway.
They were at that time.
Yeah, but they strike me more people who were traditional, maybe the traditionalists, I'll be careful how I think that
traditional Zikists.
Yeah, because by the time I think by the time we get into the weeds of it, that we might be able to.
Well, let's get into the weeds. I mean, because there might be people listening who have not watched.
Yeah, but the second bit, and I think this helps us a lot, is that I struggled. Maybe I haven't paid too much mind to it, but I also struggled. As part of my first reactions, I struggled to locate. I mean, it's a 1957 production, as you say, Saeed. But it's difficult for me to locate in what time frame exactly, pre-colonially that it was set. So was it set colonially, colonially, that it was set in. So are we talking about the 1890s or just the early?
No, I don't think it was far back as that.
Yeah. It looked like it was set
like 1950s,
yes,
60s,
post the real bubbling. Because look, I mean, so now
1940s.
No, even later than that.
Maybe 50s, like 50s.
Yeah. No, because there was so I think one marker, so maybe Namigu need to do my research, be saying at just the time when Africans were being, or Nigerians were being allowed to get into the legislative council at the time. So I think that's the main marker of it.
Yeah, true. And, that would have been 20s and 30s, right?
Mm-hmm.
In terms of getting into the legislative council. But I think so that's fair. Like if we're talking about Lagos, like the first Nigerians in the legislative council in Lagos would have been the 20s, right?
Oh, okay. So you see, but we need to, but we now have a fair bit of.
But the film is not like trying to be that historically specific. American films set in Africa for American audiences are not going to be. So why I'm saying this is because the guy who they even bring into the council, the character played by Sydney Poitier, who's called Obam in the film. Yeah, he's very cultured black. But he doesn't necessarily come across as the kind of property chiefs that would have been admitted into the Legislative Council in the first place,
And he strikes me as somebody who was modeled or role modeled after Zeke himself.
Yes.
That's kind of the impression that I got.
I felt like he was a Zeke and Nkrumah fusion. But anyway, let's probably get into the film more directly in terms of what happens before we come back to reflect on some of these reviews. So, I mean, who wants to give like a brief pocket summary of how the narrative progresses? Of course, we'll support you. Oyeji, this sounds like a job for you in a way.
Yeah, I think the movie opens up with a young, I don't know, when I say young, a vibrant man that seems to be ushered into the political arena of like previously, or arena of like white dominated folks in the colonial part, or in colonial Nigeria. Let me just put it, in colonial Nigeria. So, but
Although, hang on,
even
sorry, is it specified that it's Nigeria? Or is it just West Africa?
well, they were speaking Igbo, so I would guess.
Yeah, fair.
So Eastern Nigeria. So, but even before that, there was like
what I mean is, like, so Americans watching it in 57, would they have known it was Nigeria, or would they just see it as West?
No, they wouldn't have known it was Nigeria. I tried to go into the movie with an open mind, but nothing was precisely Nigerian.
Right.
You know, there was something
in the entry in the beginning. Nothing was. It just felt like in the beginning, nothing was precisely. But it was until we went further into the movie, then speaking Igbo and some other things, you know. But with the hanging of the dead hawk, in front of these colonial lords, in front of their houses, like government officials, you know, you'd see that there's been something brewing. Yeah. And then the tension had been brewing, and the local or traditional guys were using it as a warning, the dead animal as a warning to the officials, the foreign officials there. So I think as a pressure release valve, they got a black or Nigerian person, local person to get into government and feel like be a mouthpiece for these guys. But the person that got into this government didn't necessarily agree with the approaches of the white guys, and wanted a much more compact and direct form of not allowing or allowance of the black people for self-government, but just let people get onto the stage of determining their own destiny.
Yeah.
But the white guys were a bit slow. They're applying the brakes on that. They didn't want a radical approach, you know, and the guy was pushing and being much more forceful. Look, give us this. Even if the bare minimums, let's have this, you know, program put in place. But they didn't do that. And there was a lot of tension on the other side of the people that were much more militant about self-government, you know, and to a point where the guy didn't have much of a choice Obama, this is Obama we're talking about now, didn't have much of a choice than to go with the plan. But the go with the plan of ambushing, using violence as a tactic to, you know, pass a message across to these guys. But there's the religious aspect of the movie where, you know, the white people brought Christianity to the village, you know, enjoining them to move away from the shamans, the traditional worship, and, you know, follow the embodiment of Christ as a universal father that embraces everybody, regardless of color, you know, and which these guys at the head of the church were white people trying to use it as something to dilute revolutionary fervor, you know. So these things came in place to sort of put brakes in the revolutionary struggle. Right. That's how I see it. And, you know, it got to a point where one of the main white guys lost their life. They lost their life, and, you know, led to a moment of rethink of maybe having like a peaceful transition. And also that's essentially the summary of the movie, where religion or Christianity came out almost on top of, you know, the plot. Yeah. And this goes back to the point that I made in the beginning, that it feels or felt like a gospel production, you know. So that's where I'll leave it for now.
Nice. Yeah, I think that's quite a decent summary. I mean, and provides, like, you know, a spine, so to speak, for the discussion. I mean, Megat, what are the critical elements you might want to add to that overall narrative OAG has provided, overall narrative spine OAG has provided?
Like I said, it's I think that you know, the movie throws up the conflicts, you know, as they were in colonial times, in the lead up to independence, and some of the forces at play, forces that, you know, were at play because, they were jostling for which, segment of society would play, segment of society as Nigeria had begun to evolve, would play the leading role in shaping, the question of nationalism, and how Nigeria were to evolve. So what I think OAG, means, my interpretation of how OAG says that, the church, I can't remember his exact words, but
gospel.
But I think that it's kind of a reflection of the reality of, the Nigeria that came to be by 1960, in the sense that, it resolves the conflict in a way that shows that the church then basically played, or maybe if you like religion, but in this case, the church then played a very leading role, or, much more leading role than, the unions. Or if you like, I've tried to characterize, one force as, traditionalists, but there's a way also to think about them as communists. So maybe, yes, the Zikists, and how they then were outmaneuvered, So there's also a way to read this as, Orban being modeled after Zik, and, the conflict that he had with the radical, elements within the Zikist
Absolutely.
movement. So, if you're
well, look, before we get into the reads, just, let's, let's just spell out, make sure we're good on the plot. Because of course there will be people who haven't seen the film, always just giving us kind of plot outline. So I'm wondering if there are other plot points you want to emphasize or include in just that basic summary before we, and then we'll get into what reading the film more closely. What do you think?
Part of the Black community, we didn't think so. And that, there were the more moderate folks who turned out to be the guys who then, who were handed over power. So you have the Ziks of this world, the Awolowos of this world, so that negotiation, there's a way in which, the plot teases out or draws out, that negotiation that was made between, the Awolowos and the Ziks of this, world with, the colonial government. Because, in one of the scenes that plays out in the courtroom, you could see how, the colonial government was trying to moderate, this opposing forces. So I think that, I don't think, except maybe as we go, much more into the conversation, I don't think there's anything really to add about, the plots. Yeah.
How about favorite scenes or standout scenes for you? I'll say for me, the standout scene was when Oban, again played by Sydney Poitier, is giving a speech to unionists. And in fact, he's building up fervor. It's like it's an agitational speech among the unionists. And, he's also wearing a red shirt. And I think the unionists are coal miners.
Yeah.
So then that's kind of hang on. A red affiliated guy agitating the unionists before a confrontation with the colonial state after 1945 in Nigeria is kind of okay, this is probably as close as we're going to get to a portrayal of the Zikists.
Communist influence.
Exactly.
In the movie.
Yeah, but I think my own favorite part.
Yeah, that stood out to me.
Yeah, I think my own favorite part must have been in the legislative chambers. I think it was his first Obama's first legislative meeting, where I don't know if that's where he made that remark now, but some part where he made the remark that, that the agitation by the, let's call them the members of the Zikist movement or communist tendency within the Nigerian state as it was being formed, that their activities tended to be more impactful than, the union calling a strike, that the government was more receptive, to. So I think it was even kind of an acknowledgement that he wouldn't even have elected into or been, I don't think he was even elected. He couldn't have been deployed into the legislative chambers without the agitation of, this radical element within, the Nigerian fold, which, which superseded whatever he was trying to do, even as a unionist, So I think that acknowledgement is something that I find very useful, especially, because it was pointed out by, that early in the day. That,
so this, Megan, this is what you just said, right? Is why I think the film is worth watching. I mean, we'll come back to this when we get into reading the film more closely, but the film has a complex political economy. Like, it portrays the contending forces in a way that you're very unlikely to get in contemporary film about Nigeria. Do you know what I mean? Or or even most of the classic colonial apologia or propaganda, right-wing propaganda stuff. Like, so I find that very curious, like how granular they get into the contending forces that were pushing for resisting decolonization. Despite how it tries to resolve that at the end with some kind of missionary fervor. I mean, you would have to stick to the end to understand that, and many people might not have stuck to the end. And, you can, of course, read the film against the grain, So I think, for all those reasons, there's like really interesting thing to discuss in the film. But before we get into that, OAG, your favorite scene from you? Is it the prison scene with the guy?
There are two parts that I like. Well, I think the second one ties more into me just extrapolating stuff, but I'll leave the second one for later. The one that is on my mind was when the violence was coming to a head, when the guys were organizing and they were almost at the what's the name of that place there, where it seems to be the headquarters of the white guys.
The Bill Deal Export. So that signifies, business interest.
Yeah, that place where most of them were, and they were all ready to have a shootout and all. And one certain white guy was saying, "Look, what have we? These people, they deserve to hate us. Like, you guys don't come out there guns blazing." He was trying to talk some sense, like, we've only exploited these guys, and you're saying they're coming to, they have the right. Almost just saying it in other words.
Yeah, I'll just jump in here to say, it seemed like something of a portrayal of what you might call a little white liberalism, or maybe.
Sorry, I made a cut this place for
no, all good.
Editing. There was one at the door.
White liberalism or allyship, or how would you describe?
Yeah, not white ally. It's like when things get to head and you're afraid, and some sort of logic and reason shines through, and you're like, oh man, we actually don't have to be here. We've been exploiting these people.
No, hang on.
They have the.
You wouldn't call it reason in a pure calculative.
No, not reason. Like, of course, there are some things that life and death will make you understand. Which
but they have the balance of power now, so that's what I'm saying. In the sense,
I know, but
and they should.
I think there's something that the film. I think one of its most.
Wait, hang on. Sorry. So just land my point there. I guess I was saying that it seemed like that guy was expressing not a calculative position.
It's more from fear.
Political. You don't think? You think? Right?
I think it's more from fear. Like, when not
which
that
guy
we're going to win. There was a white guy
reluctant to who punched like the ringleader in the face at some point. Is it that guy?
I think it was the guy, but the one that was trying to advise against bloodshed there, like, no, we shouldn't do this.
The clergy guy lost his life.
Yeah, he lost his life. No.
Yeah, not the other guy.
There was another guy, so that was at least that voice that was saying, let's not do this, we're not doing well, okay, someone can think like that. And when violence is at your doorstep, we know the balance of power is.
No, sure, but the rationalization was not so much that like we might be harmed. The rationalization was more so that like he was raising like moral questions, fundamental moral
Let's
questions.
not take the law into our hands. Let's leave this for the police.
No,
Yeah,
I just feel like I thought he was also saying like, oh, this colonial enterprise is illegitimate.
It was towards such lines. And what I even felt was without the promise or the possibility of violence, thoughts like that, even if he had, it might not bubble to the surface. So it shows like borrowing from Fanon's first chapter of that concerning violence. Violence has its, it has some sort of, it puts you on almost equal plane when you're claiming your humanity in the face of like degrading,
No, I think that, I mean, I don't know if I'll go as far as violence was like the demobilizing factor for.
No, not demobilizing. No, I'm not saying it's demobilizing factor. I'm saying that, the possibility of being hurt, being harmed. It's not that was a mobilizing factor. The mobilizing factor was the economic problem, unions, all that.
Yeah, so thank you. So I think that it was more economic than it was, fear of physical harm. Yeah, because those guys at that Basedale estate, I think, were representative of the wide economic interest in Nigeria. Now, which differed from the colonial government's interests, which was also a bit different from the interest of the church. So even within, the movie does not.
Yeah, again, that's why I'm calling that guy white liberal. You guys know one great.
Yeah. But you know how I don't disagree. But I want to just clarify, say that white, so when you say the colonial era, it's not there were groups that formed, and it's not a monolith group, in that sense. So and this is something that I think some of the, in one of our group readings we had come across, that there was friction also between business interests and at least the colonial government,
Yes, and presumably even in some cases, friction between religious interests, business interests, and like a three-way friction among the major colonial.
Yeah. So I think that one of the high points or highlights of the movie is that it doesn't do a great job of showing this, but it does try to show, maybe you have to read in between the lines, but so that's why it's a really, like you said, a very complex tapestry of how the colonial period then evolved and how we then got independence, because all these things then played with also the different groups within, those who were being colonized, and their reactions to how they thought that they should go about, liberation. So it's just that the movie then resolves that conflict, in favor of
church.
Yeah, not just the church, but Africans who had, kind of pandered towards the church.
Yeah. In other words, Christian converts.
So my second part ties somewhat into that, but maybe as we go on, we'll see that. But I feel though, all what Emeka has talked about, and what you are saying, Side, is when I say colonial era, it's like, let's liken it to like having HIV. If you get HIV, some other diseases go creeping. People go come, you go get cold sores, this one, that one, this one. But the principal I say, a bunch of motherfuckers that are not supposed to be there, they are there, they are changing the structure of your country from the inside out.
The analogy is compelling, but maybe not necessarily chronologically accurate, in the sense that like you got traders first on the African coast before you got the colonial forces.
Colonial
And I mean, you know, and the traders, were not always on the same page as the, you know, sometimes, in fact, sometimes, you know, look, the traders who arrive, and in fact, you know, traders arrive and then you start getting, in fact, maybe you get explorers first and then you get traders and then you get missionaries. But, you know, the traders sometimes were getting a bad deal. You know, they weren't always getting the best deal. And, you know, when the traders arrived, initially, the Portuguese, they, you know, they were arriving before like the ideas of racism had crystallized. Some of them were quite impressed, you know, by what they were seeing, and, you know, quite taken by like these coastal kingdoms, and like in some cases where, you know, the terms of trade at the onset were more equal, right, than the terms of trade by the end. So I guess the point I'm making, if they portrayed the traders in some cases as, or the business interests, as having more liberal inclinations and less sort of domineering or pro-imperial inclinations, like that isn't historically inaccurate. I mean, there is some precedent for that in the history of how the European-African interaction develops. You know what I'm saying? So,
yeah, but I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying. Like from a more academic standpoint, you know, that's the line to go. But in the movie, I don't think they did a not good job, but it wasn't specified like they were too different. You know, it just felt like they all came, and now intellectuals or people who know to sabi the chronology. Now them go feed delineate or separate this business interests with like colonial and then missionary and all, you know. But what was the baseline of things was the presence, the way of handling business, the government, and even, you know, when they were making comments like, what this spiritual juju thing, you're not supposed to be, you know, all these things just shows that, you know, the way things were viewed or the approach to how Africans, they do things, you know, it wasn't from seeing us as equals, as the same. There was a white person on top and then the black people, they below.
Yeah.
You know, so that's not the general theme.
Yeah.
I mean, they go with.
And then
the second one,
yeah. No,
you wanted to say something?
Okay. Well, I was going to say, obviously, by that point in history, like the interests of these various like segments of the colonial enterprise had converged much more.
Yeah. So that's where I'm probably taking it from. And then the second one now was when he made an analogy. No analogy, was telling the story in China where he spoke to a young person. The young person was like, that part?
Wait, like, look. You say he, so maybe give a bit more detail, but because
I'm going to give more. Okay. I was going to give more detail. Now look at China that didn't fucking go with that shit. Look present data. Look how better they turned out. They didn't absorb all that rubbish. The boy eventually
turned out to be. You tell them the rubbish before you come to the present day.
Because I think they were trying to portray Mao Zedong's revolution.
Just talk through the scene. Just set the scene. Set the scene.
So the guy was saying when he was, I might be wrong though.
But which guy?
But the main chaplain, the main religious guy, what's his name? I've forgotten his name. There was a main guy that was like the head of the church, was talking about his exploits in China and how he sort of adopted a young boy. You know, was preaching to him about Jesus Christ, all that. The boy was like a son to him. And then the hands of the communists in China, they got to the boy. You know, they started doing like political, maybe, will I say they indoctrinated the guy or they exposed him to like communist views. They arrested the religious guy. And the boy, after a couple of time, spending some time with the communists, he changed, like he was asking the guy, what are you doing here? Who makes you the white face of, you know, Jesus, blah, blah, blah. You know, you're feeling like your own way of doing things or how you see the world, you know, should be through a white prison. He was asking him fundamental questions, which I feel the boy, if I don't read that Little Red Book by Chamama, you know, if he had gotten indoctrinated and followed through with the communist way of thought, and they kind of wholly purged the guy away from China. Now extrapolate forward a couple of maybe over 100 years now. I went with the Chinese Revolution where they do way lead to all these things and chasing all these guys away. Look the pathway where both countries follow. Who you gonna let that be? That's where I'm just thinking, looking forward.
That's why.
So that more of futuristic thinking. We're going day funny to me. So
no. But that's part of what makes the film maybe undermine its message. That the message of the film ends up being surpassing the message the filmmakers want to pass across. Which is again why I think this is quite an interesting thing to watch. But yeah, you're right. I mean, that would probably be my second favorite or most interesting scene as well. You have this, to reiterate, you have this missionary, I think his name was Bruce Craig or so in the film.
Yeah, Craig.
Craig, who is advising Obama, and trying to calm down the tensions that we've already alluded to that were bubbling up. And so he draws an example from his previous station in China, where he adopted this son, and the son drifted towards radicalism. The adopted Chinese son, and basically embraces the Communist Party, and at a point in time, starts to see his adopted father Bruce as a traitor, right, or as a imperialist, and so the narrator, the Bruce guy, Bruce Craig, who is positioned in that moment as kind of a narrator, is sort of gesturing at the pitfalls of anti-colonial radicalism, right? To suggest to Obama that, look, is this what you want? Do you want a kind of communist revolution to happen here?
Yes.
Unsurprisingly, the answer OG says is yes. But, of course, the film answers, and Obama ultimately, in part because he hears that narrative, but also because of some developments that go on, the violent confrontation that happened shortly thereafter. Obama calms down. I mean, he is actually ultimately de-radicalized, you could say, by both that story and the trajectory of the story after that. So, I mean, yeah, I guess it's I find that to be quite a fascinating scene because of how it portrays something I think was fairly accurate, which is that the fear of communism did help demobilize leading nationalists in the 40s and 50s, including, I think, Azikiwe. But you even hear people like Amino Kano be like, no, I'm not a communist. I just want freedom for my people. Does that make me a communist, So that anti-communism, again, being portrayed in the colonial period, and it's, something that I think the mainstream history of colonization, independence, nationalism in Nigeria really doesn't pay enough attention to. So for that reason, the film does us a service, I think. What do you think, Mega?
Yeah, but there's also the prelude to this conversation that Craig has with Obama, where Obama was taken to see an older lady who shared a school of thought which was strange, but probably. So that part of the movie, I think I watched it very absent-mindedly. But now that I see that it's an important piece, I'll go back and I try and get the hang of it. But there's this old lady who, the African clergy, who actually did invite Craig to come, to that neck of the woods, took Obama to, and part of how he presented the lady's case was that this lady is the representative of, a small group of voices that you're not paying any mind to. So there's almost as though there's a third school of thought, and this is significant because it's coming from a black woman, or a native, if you like. So that even within, the forces amongst the natives jostling for, the best way to go about independence, there was, maybe, I don't know if even if it was smaller, but not so powerful in terms of they were not being violent or they didn't have the education to back themselves up, but that they were not for, militant, cultural revolution.
Wait, hang on, Megan, remind me of this scene. So, who takes Orban to see this old woman, and what's
the black clergyman, the one who, the one who gave a speech after Obama had given a speech at the colliery with the coal miners, the union speech, who said, "Oh, there's another." He even said it that there's another way to think about this. That's just one. So I think that that if the depiction of the conflict or the conflicted voices within the ranks of the colonialists, be them the British, the business interests, or out and out government functionaries, was a bit muffled. This was a bit more pronounced, where the Zikists or the people who were pushing for cultural revolution was one side of the divide. Obama wasn't, he wasn't even inclined to that, side of the divide, So he was. I think Obama was lost, if you ask me, and that's.
Yeah.
It just, I think it was just, trying to get another perspective to.
He was open-minded.
Yeah, well, he came out. He gave one boy a whistle or a flute or something. That's
But in that scene, right, that Emeka is describing, the black clergyman, I think his name is Amugu. He takes Orban. So I'm not reading that scene so well. He takes Orban to an old lady's house, and the lady kind of like communicates. Or two of them, the essence is to sort of communicate that, there is a slow path to decolonization which doesn't trigger disruptions, and we can kind of work with the colonial arrangement. I mean, what is the message?
Yeah, I think you're onto it there. Yeah, I think that's, but I don't, like I said, I didn't pay too much mind to it, but now that we're having this conversation, I'm finding that it's a very significant piece of how the on furrows, yeah.
So it's kind of like a mixture of gerontocracy and Christianity provide some kind of like civilizing, or calming potion, which starts to de-radicalize Obama. So I mean, now that we're getting into the thick of interpretations, I want to come back to OAG briefly.
There's also the role that Eartha Kitt plays, as the wife, as Obama's wife, who is African American, I think, or maybe Black British, I don't know, but
she's the one who speaks so sweetly in Igbo. It's a scene where
So that also that controlling, well, not controlling, but mediating voice of reason somewhere in between all of that. So you see.
Yeah, because she's not big on bloodshed either.
No, she wasn't. Yeah.
She was also at some point trying to help the guys see reason in this violence thing. Let's not follow that route. Let's calm down. Look at the hospitals they built. Look at the schools. And also I'm also
Right, she was
also here saving lives.
Yes, she was working in a colonial hospital. So also the kind of do no harm perspective of a
doctor or nurse.
Some kind of pacifism, isn't it?
Yes. Was coming in this. And then, of course, I mean, since we're highlighting characters, then we have to highlight Obama's junior brother, who was the anti-colonial radical par excellence. I mean, he was never
my guy.
Whereas Obama would be pictured wearing a tuxedo, Sydney Poitier, white. That guy was always shirtless.
And always coming into the back door.
Exactly, literally coming in through the back door. So I mean, look, but the film portrays the guy. I mean, it seems like the film was somewhat ambivalent about the guy, and the film is ambivalent in general. But I'll leave my ultimate read on the film to the final.
Yeah,
But I was just gonna say that the guy is portrayed as a reckless radical on one hand, but you also are made to sympathize with his perspective to a certain extent as well, right? Because he's like, maybe that's just me feeling that way, despite what the film was trying to make me feel. But he still comes across as somewhat sympathetic character because he's like, portraying how this system is illegitimate and exploitative, and living under it for one day is a stain on human consciousness and dignity, right? And his arguments were to Obama were tended to be quite sharp. So I don't know. I mean, despite the film being a missionary kind of film or resolving in that way, they didn't dismiss the guy as some kind of a black devil. How do you guys see
They
it?
couldn't have. They couldn't have, because one subtext of the film too is that amongst the radicals, the native radicals, they had white sympathizers, which was depicted by another character who I think worked in the mines and had told Obama's brother, I can't remember his name now, that is it Danka or Sanka or something, but anyway, that whether he believes it or not, he's on his side, and that he could always come to him. So part of the way that the film resolves, because essentially what the business interests, tried to do was to heap the blame of these raids or the raiders on Obama, that he was being two-faced, that he was actually, because actually, in fact, they go on to draw, because the hawk, according to the movie, the meaning of the hawk in Igbo was Obama, and that he was the leader of, but that he was putting up, within the legislative council, a different face. So I think that there's
So look,
a way.
I mean, to that extent, this is precisely the Zikis. Zik. You know what I mean? The way your name is adopted by a radical movement to
still you're an embodiment of something that's like almost different.
Exactly. No, but yeah, Mega, you were making a wider point. Sorry, I cut you off there. But I just want to point out that obviously that's the Zik situation.
Yeah. Because I think that there's another way in which that movie ends, that could have amounted to the radicals winning, but in order for them to have won, that they needed to have thrown Obama under the bus, and that's where maybe the blood tie comes in. And
his brother did not. His brother at the critical moment.
Yeah, didn't find him. Yeah, did not betray him yet.
Right. So, I mean, yeah. So we're getting now deep into the interpretive thing, right? And I guess Emeka, I'm starting to. It's like I think I'm drawing you into my own position about the ambivalence of the film. But OG, who sees the film as maybe less ambivalent, I want maybe to give OG a chance to give us his ultimate read on the film. Like, what does this film about? And like, what does it, you've suggested this, but I want to give you an opportunity to kind of like articulate it clearly.
I just think it tries in its own way to show the different types of forces, at play during that time. It'd be interesting to know what the production team and the financiers, where they stand and what they intend to show with their cultural production or the movie, whatever, because that will also give us, like, from a materialist standpoint, where the money is going, where the money comes from, and what the producers and financiers or executive producers, what they're trying to show. But from this side of like viewership, it tries to show a little bit of, the missionary, a little bit of the struggle going on on the ground, a little bit of someone in the middle, trying to, balance things out, a little bit on the extreme, which attempt to be well-rounded by the producers or by the, movie director, whoever is doing the thing. But maybe the not a problem, but because of where we stand, this is where we are examining and putting extra magnifying glass, like, oh, it should have panned out this way, should have panned out that way. There's nothing we can do about what they set out to do or what they did in the movie. But I'll just have loved for the triumph, the unconditional triumph.
You would have liked all the natives and most of the settlers to have
something like the Haitian Revolution. Yes, something like the Haitian Revolution, where where they won, where the radical people won and they got rid of all those people, arranged. Like, let's have some really fundamental transformation, But how it turned out was disappointing.
You're going to have to create that in real life because unfortunately film is not going to give you that satisfaction.
I know.
No, but I think
maybe if I was someone that financed the movie, I would have said, okay, this is how I want my movie to. Let me get the money. Play it this way. Whoever wants to act it.
The thing is,
act it.
No, I don't.
Yeah, let's have it. Let's let you come in.
I don't necessarily agree with OAG's take. I think that the timing of the movie, in terms of its production, helps us resolve what the movie sought to do. I'm just saying that I think that it's important to, point out that the ambivalence of the movie isn't entirely a bad thing. One, because the year of production of that movie gives us an idea what, producers, whether it was colonialists or even CIA project. What they tried to do was say, oh, okay, these are the trade-offs, point out, of course they framed the narrative, they were framing the narrative in that regard, but here are the trade-offs. You could have a violent, cultural revolution and end up like, China, which OAG doesn't think is a bad way to have ended up.
Yeah, but at the time, it was,
Yeah, but that outcome wasn't first, for me, isn't even a given, because you have examples of African countries that went that route. And,
even for China at the time, it didn't appear to be a given, because China in the 50s was not like a desirable situation.
So that's one point that I think is noteworthy. The second one now is the one that I have lost but if it comes back to me, I'll make the point. Yeah.
Okay. Well, since I'm coming in from a similar perspective as you are, maybe I'll jog your memory. But I think I also like the ambivalence of the film because one, the thing that OG is slightly missing in his take is that if you make a film that strikes one line so firmly, and the line being like, oh, the only option is violent, revolutionary, cultural overthrow of colonialism or whatever, there's no guarantee that the audience will accept that. You know what I mean? Because people watch film not necessarily to ask themselves, what must I do? They watch film to be entertained. And if the film is not entertaining, even if the message is good, people might turn against the message. You see what I mean? So it can backfire when you just do like, oh, here is what to do. This is what we want. Let's just portray it directly. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is like, in terms of the ambivalence, and we're talking about the conditions of the film's production. Like, so it's a Hollywood film. You got to remember, it's an American production in the 50s. And
a black man winning won't be that palatable.
This was the civil rights period. So a black man winning outright, would have been seen as extremely radical. One, but then black people being treated as canon fodder, or the film centering strictly around white people alone, would also have not been interesting. Because, black people were increasingly seen as agents, maybe even the agents of historical change in a lot of the, like in America in the 50, the civil rights movement was really gathering pace. And of course, Sydney Poitier, his successes have to do with this specific transition that's occurring in Hollywood. I mean, of course, Sidney Poitier is also a singular figure in Hollywood because he's, kind of embraced across the political spectrum, and he's bohemian, and he just kind of defined this figure of like the spotless black man at the time. So the choice of Sidney Poitier as the lead actor in this also is telling of the political moment. But keep in mind that Poitier was part of the March on Washington. Like he's still participated in some of the political transitions or political activities of his time. So he's not apolitical, but it's true that kind of like Obama, Poitier is kind of embraced across the political spectrum, would be my understanding. And he's kind of seen as a safe black man. Do you know what I mean? So that itself is an interesting choice, but suggests tensions. It doesn't suggest to me that one perspective, say the white racist perspective, is the dominant perspective in this film. The second thing I think is quite interesting is like the 50s in this US are also this moment when the anti-communism, the sharpest point, it's like anti-communism becomes duller. It's not as sharp as it used to be. Like, McCarthy, is it Joseph McCarthy? America, you remember first names better than I do, but,
McCarthyism, I know the concept.
Yes, McCarthyism, right? This Senator Joseph McCarthy, right? The guy who was leading the leading anti-communist in the House, in the Congress in the U.S. Actually literally dies in 1957, the same year as this film is released. And in a way, McCarthyism had kind of peaked and was on its way out by the early 50s. I think by 54 or so, there's a Supreme Court decision. I can't remember the exact decision, but it basically weighs against this kind of witch hunting that had been going on to root out communists in politics, the army, and especially in Hollywood. So you can see that like the chokehold of McCarthyism had relaxed, but the film is still obviously anti-communist, right? So it's not to say that now communism was embraced, but the fact that you can have that white unionist saying to the radicals, like, hey, come to me. And the fact that, like, again, Obama's brother, I think Kanda is his name. The fact that he's not just waved off as like, like kind of devilish foreign, because the whole anti-communism thing is often that the way they portrayed it was often like these people were foreign infiltrators. But no, they portrayed like radicalism as indigenous. Of course, the meta frame is still like Chinese Communist Revolution is a bad idea, but, they didn't just wave it off. So I guess because of that, the film maybe is able to live longer or be more watchable today than it might have been if they had tilted very far in either direction. That's my...
I think also, sorry, OUG, but I think also that reference to, the Chinese, communism is a telltale sign. We know from studying, some of the works in the archives that, or just even coming across those works and not even, really studying them, that I think it's a pointer to, so if you had said which kind of communism became, or communist, was it, Chinese, brand of communism that was more vibrant within, the Nigerian state as it was coming to be in the lead up to independence. I think that, because it wasn't the Soviet style communism that was being, if we're trying to nitpick here, that was being referenced or being critiqued, it's a matter of which kind of communism was on the rise. I suspect,
quite an interesting point here, Megan.
Yeah,
I think definitely
because it's also like about culture. Because you know how like the Chinese communists, one distinguishing feature is like trying to take the best of
things
like domestic culture, indigenous culture, and kind of bring it into the modern era. And I didn't know that like Maoism or, you know, that kind of cultural revolution stuff was that popular in West Africa, but it's interesting to see like the writers maybe trying to preempt that, seeing as like indigenous folkloric kind of ideas of liberation were maybe gaining some steam. You know, the hawk.
And even in terms of financing too as well.
Right, well, OG, you've been trying to...
Yeah, to this final point that you made, that idea of picking the best things out of like the folkloric aspect and picking the best aspects, you know, there's some writings, you know me, I'm a Cabral guy. There's some writings where he kind of alludes to stuff like that, which is interesting, just going into that part. And then like the general points I've made, most of the comments about the movie is just, you know, my own preconceived bias where I come with it. At some point, I want to start seeing where we win in movies. I'm tired of, you know, like where we authoritatively win. You know, I don't know if there are movies on like Haitian Revolution or what we say people actually win, hands down. We don't want any ambivalence. We win. We win. You know?
No penalty shoot.
I just would like to watch something like that, you know. So something like that, you know, because my standpoint now say, Mo just get something we go uplift mentally. Like one of the very early movies that we did too on this our podcast was that Shall We Read the movie. Yeah. Don't forget that the people went into the bush they sort of tried to overthrow the government, take guns, all that, you know. You can also paint, if you want to do like a movie, I understand the constraints of the time, financing, all these things that Said has said, Emeka has said, you know, these are real issues that would constrain production, what we want to see, or what can even be imagined at that time, you know. So, but you know, now we say this the crime, not the crime of presentism or the wala of presentism. I say you go just one filter and through waiting day now, and the broadening space of what you can do culturally, artistically, all that, you know. So that's just where my own comment is coming from. Like, yeah, but I understand what you guys are saying in terms of the much more concrete constraints about how the movie could have been executed. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I totally get what you're saying.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
Yes, and by the way, I agree that it would be nice to see more agitational propaganda or our side of the spectrum, you know. So we probably have to look out for that in the future films. But I mean, maybe the final thing is that maybe final two questions from me. One is about violence, and the second is about religion. So very easy subjects to tackle, of course. But jokes apart, I mean, the perspective on the film, the film passes across on violence also strikes me as a bit ambivalent. You know, I know you were even making this point too, that like the specter of violence does cause some reflection and shake-up within the colonial camp. I mean, so the film obviously ultimately condemns violence, but violence plays an important role in moving the conversation forward, in or even the threat of violence, you know, it plays an important role in actually propelling history and like shifting the conditions around in the film. So it's like the film is maybe passing across a slightly more complicated message in practice, even if some of the dialogue makes it sound like, the peaceful option is the only option. I know, Megan, do you see it that way as well? I mean, what was your read upon watching the film? Like, it almost seems like the message they were communicating verbally, and then the subliminal message they were passing across differed to some extent. And the question of violence sort of is one of the places where that emerged somewhat clearly for me. But I wonder how it came across to you, Megan.
I think that to the extent that, you know, violence is a major trope for the movie, you know, I think that it serves, you know, dual purpose at the very least. One was to, you know, in reality was as a form of agitation, you know, to quicken the pace of independence, you know, Africans governing themselves, you know. But there's also the counter to it, in which I think that, I mean, so the first instance that I give is that violence was used as a bargaining chip, right? But I think that
I guess I'm talking about like the film's portrayal of violence, less like the historical use of violence or significance of violence.
even in the film's portrayal, I'm saying that the film portrays it even in its historical sense. As it was.
Yeah, I get you. You
Yeah,
think the film is fairly accurate, kind of.
Yeah, it's fairly accurate in that portrayal of it. But that use of violence as a bargaining chip to quicken the pace of the move to self-actualization is one way in which it does it. But I think that it also does it in reverse, if you like, in the sense that it informs on the way Obama now as representative of a certain kind of African elite looked at their views on what independence should have been, because there's a sense in which I think what the clergy guy Craig was trying to say to Obama, willy-nilly, is that if you side with this militants, you might get to your destination faster, right? But that you would certainly lose your grip on power, which is where I think the Chinese example comes in.
And also on your like humanity or something, because you lose your grip on like recognizing who's your friend and all that stuff.
Yes, and who you are. So but that the flip side to this, is that if you allow for a slower transition, where things would have been put in place, at the time, when you assume power, you would have, much more firmer. In fact, in the case of where you choose the former, it's a 50-50 thing, But if you choose this gradual move to, self-actualization to independence, you would have reinforced your own grip on power. That group of elites, and we can name names, the Nnamdi Azikiwe. The group that came into existence and have history on their side, such that the candors of this movie wouldn't, are like footnotes, and then Obama is kind of like, the
main character. He remains the main character.
Yeah, the main character. So I think it plays on that which group of African elites actually took power and the compromises that they needed to have made, because it was clear, from the onset that Obama wasn't very receptive to the business interest. If you look at colonialists from the business groupings.
Obama was left-leaning, maybe center left or social democrat.
Yeah, maybe more center left. But that he's what do they call that in Damascus movement? I mean, his whatever that biblical reference is, was that even in courts when he was being tried, he then came and said, "Oh, that this person is my brother. This person is my brother. That the color of the skin didn't matter. It was what So of course, that kind of speech was meant to accommodate the business, the guys on the business side, the clergyman, people who thought differently from how the militants were looking to approach the situation. So those, I think that's in a nutshell for me is what how violence as a trope was used to show the kind of trade-offs, or to give a sense of, how, that elite group would have measured, the kind of trade-offs that they had to make, and how much they wanted to take over from, the white man who was on his way out, but it was a question of how fast can he get, how fast can we throw him out of the way. So, for instance, in reality, if they had pandered to the candors of the movies world, we would have probably beat Ghana to independence, or would have gotten independence somewhere around the mid-1950s or 1957. Whereas we ended independence 5 years.
Megan, I think you're really hitting the nail on the head in several ways with this response. Because for one, I think that yes, there is an anti-Nkrumah energy to the film. Like it's kind of obvious in some way. I mean, there is a clear they're making a statement about Nkrumah. I think. And, of course, the film being released in 1957, which is the same year Nkrumah was released, if I'm not mistaken, is maybe not entirely accidental. I think the other thing you're pointing out that's quite interesting is that maybe Nkrumah was already seen as, Ghana maybe was already seen as a lost cause to radicalism at that stage. So the message is to Nigeria and it's to like countries like Nigeria that are decolonizing. And, the message is also to probably primarily to the like upper crust of anti-colonial society, like African society, because who's going to watch an English-speaking film with this, the spare cash to attend the movies, and who can cross the racial divide to attend the movies is going to be people like Azikiwe, or of course these people were in government at the time anyway. Azikiwe and stuff, they were already. Like he was already premier of Eastern Nigeria, so it's going to be the second generation. Like maybe the film was made to the Zikists, made for the Ziki in terms of its African audience. Of course, I know that the primary audience of the film is probably not African. It's it's probably people in the US, but you can just see how like it's a cautionary tale in some ways, but a complicated cautionary tale, man, because it's one that says it's one, as you rightly point out, America, that doesn't say violence is ineffective. It actually says violence is effective, but it just will change the balance of power in favor of younger people over you guys who have worked hard, gotten a Western education, and are now being positioned for power. And I guess then, if that's the case, if you take that for granted, it would make sense why, according to Premium Times anyway, in a review of this movie, it would make sense why Azikiwe supported the film. So according to Premium Times, Azikiwe had to vacate Premier's lodge. He had to vacate his own house where some scenes from the film were shot. You know what I mean? So, of course, there are multiple reasons why Premier of Eastern Nigeria, he would have been proud to have a Hollywood production, like Western-oriented Premier of Eastern Nigeria, would have been proud to have a Hollywood production being, showing that, this part of the world had come of age. But I suspect that he probably would have also approved of the message, which is calm down, let the, negotiating adults handle the transition from the colonial state to now, and leave this youthful exuberance to one side, even if it could be effective. Yeah, Oji, what do you think about the use of violence? Because, Mega and I are reading it as violence is not completely dismissed in the film. It's kind of treated somewhat in a complex manner somewhat in the film. Do you buy that, or?
Yeah, I do. If not, it will have been even much more de-emphasized to the point where they won't show some sort of live action going on, and So yeah, it has a complicated it has complicated markings in the movie, whereby that second point that you made with allowing the older guys or the well-polished guys or the more pliable guys to handle the transitioning of the country into, maturing or independence that would be a good point, because you can lose power to guys like Kanda and then make a mess of the transition, so which these points that you made are really crucial onto, and then tying back into Nkrumah. This is it's a cautionary tale, which I feel, they might be trying to pass to other countries okay, independence is starting to, we're going to go, but maybe follow this line so that it won't be messed up and all, So, I think that's it. It's not dismissed, but it's shown. And of course, I'm sure that there are certain parts of Africa where violence go down, they bust out small. So as something to just steer the zeitgeist in a direction where, you already have, recognized people that we are okay with. Let's follow this pathway. We're going to go anyway, so just do it this way and everything will be okay. So, that's what I think.
The point I was going to make earlier is that even the year of production suggests that it was shot, filmed and shot around the time, when the heady days of the Zikis movement. Yeah. I don't have the dates again to head, but either when they were disbanded, just about before they were disbanded, or when they were really the height of it, at least somewhere around the height of it. So I think they were disbanded in 59, I'm not sure anymore. And then they had 2 explosive years pre the...
No, 1950, man.
Oh, they were disbanded in 50. Oh, yeah, so I have the dates wrong. Okay.
No, but it strengthens your point because, like, then at this point, now, like 5-7 years after, I guess the film probably was all the shooting would have happened, in the 5 years, 1950 and beyond. Then the society would have digested the lessons of the Zika. So this film is portraying back the lessons, as saying like, yeah, these kind of movements are doomed to fail, kind of thing, or at least the success will not look like what they are promising.
Yeah, largely.
They were doing this with the benefit of hindsight.
Exactly. I mean, no, the more you dig into it, the more kind of interesting the film becomes as a piece of historical drama or kind of a text. I mean, so let's conclude perhaps with this final question. I mean, so given the complexity with which the film portrays the situation that it's interested in, right? I mean, how would you characterize the politics of the film ultimately? Like, is it, I mean, okay, I think we can all agree that it's a reactionary film. So, it's not it's not pro-revolution or like Black liberation. Okay, and the other thing to say is that, look, the moment when this film was being made, again, we said the civil rights, the Malcolm X version versus the MLK version were also being debated in the US, where the film was primarily going to be screened. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's a very smart intervention into like this kind of idea of religious pacifism versus like Black nationalism, which is like, and that both sides, so it intervenes in the intra-left debate among Black people. So it's kind of like a very ambitious, and you can see why Emeka is making allusions to CIA, because it's like a very well thought out intervention. You know what I mean? But what do you like? So it's not the politics of the film, but maybe the legacy of the film. Like now with us watching it, like several decades, so many decades, almost half a century afterwards, more than half a century afterwards. Is the film, what is the legacy of the film? What does it contribute? Like, is it a film that is valuable for political education, or is it like ultimately a reactionary film that would, serve to derail emerging radicalism in our times? I mean, how do you see the film now in retrospect as a political artifact, and then also maybe as a piece of art? My final question.
Some other person would have said, how do you see the film as a piece of art and also maybe...
Yeah. We don't hide what we're doing in this show.
But I think, for me, that as a piece of art is, it's a collector's item. It's not a film, it's not a film that you see once. It's a film that you have to keep going back. And because essentially that, for me, I think that it's well layered, for the film to have sparked this kind of conversation that we've had for the last hour or so, then I think that's testament to, its place in terms of, what do they call that thing now? My vocabulary don't be very poor. Yeah. But,
if you can say it in Igbo, as long as you make it sound like Eartha Kitt.
The canon. Yeah, so, I mean, in terms of, it belongs somewhere in the canon,
Yeah, it's canonical for sure.
Yeah, so, but in terms of the movie as useful in political agitation, I think that's where the ambivalence of the movie then seeps into me, because I think that I'll be ambivalent, in how my position on that. And that's a way of saying that I probably even can't answer this until maybe I've heard your responses in terms of what it does I don't think that it demobilizes, but I think that you have to take, a scalpel to it to see in the way that to see the ways in which it can be useful in terms of mobilization for the work of mobilization. That's where that's my that's where.
No, fair enough. Yeah, OG.
I think it ultimately depends on who's watching it and what they want to pull out from it. For example, to someone that's more of like maybe a pacifist or their own political, where they are at politically, maybe you're more like someone that's on the MLK side. It's a triumph. Like the movie is, things got resolved and you can see why violence is not good, this, that, But for some other people, they will argue that at the end of the day, if you are not resolving fundamental issues and you're still going to have like unfair relationship between the people that are dominating you and yourself, you must look, especially if it's like in severely inhumane conditions, you should look to liberate yourself by any means necessary. Some people, argue, so it's really complicated. But for me, like I said again, and I've not hidden it, I would have loved for the movie to pan out in a way where, okay, the guys won, they went ahead to build a prosperous country, stuff like that. But again, it's dependent on the producers and all these constraints of the time. But it's a collector's item, and we can, at certain points, whatever political message we want to pass across, depending on who's handling it, you can pick out what you want, like where people were organizing and were organized and maybe being mobilized for political action, where Obama was talking to them. That's a good point. You can use that, for showing that you can organize in workplace and all that. And then the clergy too can take aspects of it and show that, okay, we don't want loss of life. So it's really complicated. And that's the thing. The more your mind is open, the more nuanced and multi-layered things become, which, is not, it might not be a good thing. It might not be a bad thing all around, but it's also not, something that some straightforward, just one way people will want to have it, so it's really complicated. But my own bias, general bias is that, I would have loved for the people to unconditionally triumph in the face of all these things. I'll keep on saying that.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
Let me, just before you jump in and then wrap it up, let me just because like I said, I was a bit ambivalent, in terms of what it means that resource for mobilizing, mass mobilization. I think that for me, the most poignant use of that movie would be for what it teaches the left, in the sense that I think that the movie makes a strong case for the left needing to understand the structure of the political economy, not in a generalist sense, because I think even from our deliberations, we pointed out that maybe China wasn't the way to go, or couldn't have looked like the way to go in that, era. How, the left then begins to unpack what, the structure of the states and, the economy within that state, and, how it begins to interrogate. You need to know what the powers that are at play. And I find that this is a bit lacking in how the left in Nigeria, not necessarily. So for me, we need to have a well-rounded understanding, especially of even your political opponents. What their long game is, what their short game is. Before you can then, look to strike, decisive chord at the heart of what their operations is. If we're ever going to get, the left is ever going to get political power in a lifetime some of its most tenacious comrades. That's where I think that, the use of that movie is, like.
Yeah, I buy that. I think that's a fair point, that it can be used. It's sort of, it's, I would say even that it's aged well in some ways.
Yes.
And this is part of why, as OAG was saying, like, the portrayal of China, despite the film's intentions, given how China has progressed since that was screened, the film can now almost even be seen as, like, it can be read from a pro-China direction. Not saying that that's the right way to read it, but, it's aged well despite its intentions in some ways. So I think it's valuable to that extent. And I think it's also valuable to the extent that it's the only portrayal of Zikists on film that we have, I think. Even if it's, one that isn't intending to be read as a historical exploration of the Zikist movement, but it's probably as close as we have so far to that. So
I think it ultimately becomes like a resource in the hands of who's handling it, how you want to interpret it, really. And it comes from the level of consciousness of who's watching it. An ordinary person will just watch movie, not just movie. This guy, they shoot this guy, this one, that guy, they can't die. But okay, because we get some sort of little political understand. Look at that movie they talk about, now almost 2 hours. Almost 2 hours now, which is just for, some sort of, like, people will interpret it. It becomes a tool in the hands of whoever is interpreting it, and then what level of consciousness and what they want to derive or drive out of them, really, So if very counter-revolutionary Pacific taker use them as within they want use them do, and we, if we pull out positive information from them, to show some pitfalls and what could have been done, this, that, so, yeah.
Yeah, fair point. I think that's probably as clear a read on the film as we can get. But it sounds like we're all saying that it's a film we recommend other people watch, and it's a film we'll all watch again. So, all in all, an interesting experience. Yeah, and go watch the film. I don't know. Is there anything else to say? I don't know. Should we wrap up?
My question is, where do you come with the mark of the hawk now?
Yes, that's an interesting.
The cultural aspect with that now.
Yeah.
If he the mark.
Let me leave the question for our listeners.
Tell us in the comments. Tell us in the comments, what ultimately is the mark of the hawk? Is it the communist spirit that is unquenchable? Is it the ambivalence, the two-winged ambivalence that one must encounter as a leader in the midst of revolutionary foment? What is the mark of the hawk ultimately? Is it just a scary African symbol that?
As someone that's really particularly interested in zoology and
exactly. So let us know in the comments, if you've seen the film, if you'd like to see the film, and what actually is the mark of the hawk. All right, gentlemen.
Right.
Peace.